And welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Dean Obeidallah, and today very happy to welcome Glenn Kirschner back. He served as a federal prosecutor for over 30 years. You see him as an MSNBC and NBC legal analyst, also host of the YouTube channel Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner and the podcast Justice Matters. Glenn, welcome back to Salon Talks. Good to see you.
Great to be with you, Dean.
So obviously the big news is the indictment of Donald Trump was unsealed yesterday. We can get into a little bit more details, but overall, what was your takeaway?
So my takeaway was that I was surprised to see 34 felony counts brought against Donald Trump. There was a lot of speculation about how there may be some misdemeanor charges. There may be some felonies attached to those misdemeanor charges to bump them up to felony charges. I don't know that anybody was expecting 34 felony counts, which for those of us scoring at home carries a sentence potentially of up to 136 years in prison. Of course, Donald Trump would be eligible for parole when he was about 148 by my calculations. Of course, he's not going to get time like that.
Right.
But the other thing that I found remarkable about the indictment, which was accompanied by a statement of facts, ordinarily, I will say, in most practices, all of that stuff gets dumped into one document, the indictment, and it's a speaking indictment. New York has its own ways of charging. But I found it pretty remarkable that it looks like not only Michael Cohen is a marquee witness against Donald Trump. We knew that all along. He's a co-conspirator. So, of course, he's an important witness against Donald Trump. But David Pecker and Allen Weisselberg provided sharply incriminating evidence against Donald Trump. Now, that doesn't mean they will be testifying witnesses at a future Trump trial, but they may very well be. When I saw them quoting the words of David Pecker, he said, quote, "I will be your eyes and ears. I will keep a lookout for negative, damaging information. I will catch it and I will kill it. And at the same time, Donald, I will find negative things to print about your opponent." It doesn't name Hillary Clinton, but I think we can fill in the blank. This was a conspiracy that included, at a minimum, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, David Pecker, Allen Weisselberg, perhaps others. And one of the open questions is, who among them, other than Michael Cohen, will be testifying against Donald Trump come trial time?
So, we talked in the past about the potential of other charges beyond connected to hush money payments. There's three different stories that the statement of facts talk about that Donald Trump did not want disclosed to the public. One was a doorman who was paid $30,000 to say, not to say that Trump had a child illegally out of wedlock. It doesn't seem like the story was true, but it would have been relevant if we knew he paid $30,000 to keep it quiet. That would have, and two with women, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. But nothing in there about, finance crimes regarding his corporation, despite the fact the corporation was charged and found guilty in a New York court in December. Were you surprised about that?
I would say I was mildly surprised, but this is just the opening act, right? There could very well be either other separate indictments brought by New York, because it seems like, there is a criminal scheme to defraud in the first degree case ready for the making against Donald Trump personally, because that case has already been made against his chief financial officer and his organization. So perhaps we will see another indictment some months down the road, or we could even see a superseding indictment where all of these charges are put into, a more fulsome, a more complete indictment. Or Dean, maybe we see no other charges out of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. We just don't know at this point. But what I'm hopeful of is that this will not be the first indictment. Whether the next one comes in Georgia or from the feds is an open question. But I'm pretty sure, just as we have been talking all along, that Donald Trump will be indicted. Donald Trump will still be on the receiving end of more indictments.
Obviously, the Fulton County DA and the DOJ is going to look at the evidence and the law and apply it the way they're going to. But does it matter as a human, on a human level? You're a former prosecutor, that DA Alvin Bragg has been the first, and through his grand jury has been the first to indict Donald Trump.
The reason it matters is atmospheric, not legal.
Mm-hmm.
I have maintained all along, you and I have been talking about this for a very long time. No prosecutor was enthusiastic about being the first one to criminally indict a former president of the United States because it had never been done before. Well, now that the maiden legal voyage is underway, right? That barrier has been broken. And I can tell you, Dean, prosecutors may not be monolithic, but we are a competitive bunch. And now there are other prosecutors out there who know Donald Trump committed crimes in their jurisdictional backyard, whether it's Georgia, federally, or elsewhere. And now, there is this sense that, okay, I have to hold him accountable for the crimes he committed in my jurisdiction, if only because I'm going to be running for re-election, and I need to take on the tough case, the challenging, politically charged case, so I can, successfully campaign for re-election. In the federal government, look, federal prosecutors are hired, we're not elected, but we are responsible to the people of the United States. And I think the feds will feel like, okay, it may finally be time for us to step up our game and bring the charges that are so fully supported by the evidence. So yeah, I think in pretty rapid succession, we'll probably see one or more additional indictments of Donald Trump.
So we should expect more arraignment parties at Mar-a-Lago in the future? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, boy, that was quite a party last night. It was a bit of a downer, wasn't it? And I couldn't help but think, Donald Trump gets arraigned on 34 felony counts in New York yesterday. He then retreats to Mar-a-Lago and he gives a presidential campaign speech. And what is he obsessed about? He's obsessed about talking about his fictitious defenses to all of his crimes, his criminal cases, his criminal investigations. And, Dean, I'm not a political pundit. I've never come up with a presidential slogan in my life. But, I thought back to Herbert Hoover's "A chicken in every pot." That was his campaign slogan to, signal prosperity is coming. So we've gone from a chicken in every pot to Donald Trump's campaign slogan, which is apparently a defense in every court. That's what he's going to have. And he's going to sell that message to the American people as a reason to vote for him.
At some point, expect Donald Trump. He's already embraced it with the fake mugshot. He might, at his rallies, get the crowd to chant "lock me up" type of thing, just to taunt the whole thing. None of it makes sense. I mean, but I will say Donald Trump will make a great Netflix crime series. I look forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Look, if you were Donald Trump's lawyer and you're watching your client go out there, and I know he's running for president, so he's got to talk about the issues, and he can talk about Joe Biden all day, but would you be holding your breath every time he speaks to the public?
I think they know the client they took on. They made their decision with their eyes open, and I can only believe it's for the notoriety they hope it brings them, because it's not going to bring them any wealth. We know Donald Trump will end up stiffing them all at the end of the day. But, if I was never a defense lawyer, not one day in my life. That wasn't the role I wanted to play in the system, though I honor and respect my brother and sister criminal defense lawyers across the bar, because they have a really hard job to do, Dean. Not only do they have to zealously represent the rights of their client, of the defendant, they also act as a check on government overreach and abuse and misconduct, be it the police, prosecutors, the courts. They're doing double duty. And in a very real sense, they're doing God's work, not in the religious connotation of that. I always felt like as a prosecutor, sometimes I had it easier because I just had to, try to seek justice. I didn't have to try to hold the whole government accountable for potential abuse and overreach. That is a mammoth undertaking for defense attorneys. Now, all of that being said, these guys and gals knew what they were getting into when they took Donald Trump on as a client. And yet I have to believe when they watched that Hannity interview and he not only admitted to the Mar-a-Lago classified documents crimes, but he expressly gave up the motive. And as a prosecutor, I never had a defendant spout out of his own mouth why he committed the crimes. He said when Hannity was trying to throw him a lifeline and give him an out, I can't imagine, Mr. President, you would have said, "Bring me the boxes. I want to see what's in there." He said, "I have a right to do that. Of course I would do that." And do you know Richard Nixon basically sold documents back to the government for $18 million? And Dean, there you have it. Direct evidence out of the mouth of the orange horse himself about his motive for the classified documents crimes. And it is as simple and as base as money.
The orange horse. I like that very much. So, Glenn, there are different legal pundits on TV, not Fox News. I mean, just normal. Some are debating the strength of the case against Trump here in Manhattan and talking about it. Is it serious enough? Is it not? Is it going to be hard to prove, easy to prove? What's your take looking at it?
So first of all, at its core, as Alan Bragg made clear, as his prosecution team made clear in the statement of facts, at its core, he committed 36, 36 crimes, right? Falsifying business records to try to gain unfair advantage in a presidential election. In a very real sense, these crimes are about Donald Trump and his co-conspirators trying to rob us, the American voters, of the full value of our vote. And, you know, people might say, well, you're just kind of bumping up misdemeanor crimes with these, you know, these ghosts of other crimes. And I love when people say, well, you can't use a federal crime to bump up a falsifying business records crime in New York because you don't have jurisdiction over federal crimes. Let me use a couple of examples. First of all, as Alvin Bragg made clear, they committed multiple crimes. Mm-hmm. They committed violations of New York election law, violations of federal election law, false records being generated in other organizations like AMI. Mm-hmm. There are some tax implications here. There are lots of other crimes. And importantly, those crimes do not need to be specifically set out yet. It may very well be, as you and I both know, that the defense will file what's called a bill of particulars, and that will be an effort to force the prosecutors to show more of their cards about which precise other crimes you're using as predicate offenses. But here's an example I used when I was on their air this morning. Let's assume, Dean, you and I are sitting at 30 Rockefeller Center in Manhattan, and we enter into a conspiracy to commit a robbery in New Jersey, right? And then one of us take what's called an overt act. We do something. I go out and buy a gun to use in the robbery.
Right.
So New York could charge us with conspiring to rob somebody in New Jersey. They can't charge us with crimes we commit in New Jersey, but that New Jersey crime that you and I agreed to commit could become sort of a predicate offense to support the conspiracy charge. The sort of legal theory is no different when it comes to using a federal crime or a state crime in another jurisdiction to bump up your falsifying records crime from a misdemeanor to a felony. If we're engaged in falsifying business records to try to get away with crimes in New Jersey, it is still an appropriate predicate offense to bump up the charge.
Certainly. And even the former DA, Cy Vance, over the weekend said historically they charged felony falsifying business records when it was federal crimes. The only question they had was Federal Election Commission crimes, but there was no doubt it was other crimes, including tax fraud, U.S. government tax fraud, because that's what they charged Trump Organization with. One of the counts was the idea of falsifying business records to cover up not paying U.S. taxes. So this is a run-of-the-mill charge. Only question about federal election law. I wanted to also get your reaction. Donald Trump, in the lead up, in the weeks up to this indictment, was attacking Alvin Bragg, the DA, online, calling him an animal, racist, a degenerate, infamously posting a menacing picture of him holding a baseball bat next to a picture of Alvin Bragg's head. At what point does that become a crime?
Oh, it already is a crime. I believe I think it's called interfering with the due administration of government in New York. I want to say 195.05 is the New York Penal Code section that it violates. If you attempt to influence or interfere in the duties of an official government employee and you do it by virtue of threats or intimidation, that's what we have in that picture. Again, you know, a novice prosecutor could prove that to a jury in his or her sleep. Maybe it will be charged in the future. I certainly hope it is. That then presents some thorny issues of recusal, because once the Manhattan District Attorney is a named victim of a threat. There is an argument that the entire office is recused from prosecuting Donald Trump. This may be one of the sort of motivators for Donald Trump to try to go after a judge and dox the judge's daughter, go after the district attorney and call out the district attorney's wife. It may be he's trying to build a recusal issue such that he thinks he can get rid of Judge Marchand, who hates him, according to Donald Trump, or get rid of Alvin Bragg as his prosecutor. I don't think it'll work, but there were some thorny legal issues involved. What I was disappointed to see yesterday was the prosecutors raised the issue of Donald Trump's incendiary speech that is likely to incite violence, but they did not specifically ask Judge Marchand to impose or consider a gag order or a limited restriction on Donald Trump's speech or his posts. I wish they had gone that extra step, though based on the reporting, Judge Marchand said, look, he admonished both parties, right? And that's what judges do when they only want to admonish one party, but they want to be perceived as fair and even-handed. They admonish both parties to tamp down the rhetoric. It's like, well, wait a minute. I haven't seen the district attorney's office threatening witnesses, but okay, Judge, you've been fair and even-handed. You've admonished both parties. That was the first step on the road to a gag order. Donald Trump retreated to Mar-a-Lago, made the same threats and inflammatory statements last night. Now, I hope the prosecutors will seek to have him brought back into court, maybe on a show cause order, and have the judge force Donald Trump and his legal team to show cause why a gag order should not be imposed. All of this is sort of on the road to contempt or on the road to pretrial detention because you refuse to abide by the conditions set by the judge of pretrial release. I wish the prosecutors had been a little bit more forward-leaning, trying to take on Donald Trump's, dangerous speech.
It seems like Donald Trump is playing his typical playbook, but in a different game, and not understanding this game is different because he's never been charged with crimes before. And do you think this could lead to him having problems he doesn't expect? Because remember with Mueller, he attacked Mueller, he attacked FBI and Andy McCabe and all these people, but he was never charged. Now, with 34 felonies hanging over his head, it's a new game.
It is a new game, but like you say, he's playing by the old playbook. I heard some commentators say, even mafia bosses, when we go after them, don't expressly in public threaten the prosecutor's wife or the judge's daughter. Donald Trump is so over the top in his dangerous conduct. The part that will forever trouble me is the criminal justice system, whether state or federal, is not rising to the challenge, right? They're not meeting this dangerous moment because they're playing by these sort of antiquated rules of gentility from decades ago, before presidents of the United States tried to overthrow the government, unlawfully retain the power of the presidency, and threaten witnesses. But for whatever reason, the system is using its old playbook, the gentle playbook, to deal with an imminent threat to the safety of witnesses and to our democracy. And I don't quite know why they're so reluctant to meet the urgency of the moment.
In your view, because we see a lot of reporting now, DOJ through Jack Smith, special counsels, looks like he's moving swiftly, and that Mike Pence is going to have to testify. Mark Meadows' appeal was just rejected by the Court of Appeals earlier this week. We'll see if there's another appeal at the Supreme Court. But still, is DOJ late to the game? Should DOJ have been the first one to file an indictment regarding not Mar-a-Lago, but the January 6th related crimes, which are the attempted coup and the attack itself?
Yeah, because the message that has been sent is if you are an aspiring dictator who wants to overthrow the will of the American voters and unlawfully retain the power of the presidency, after you do it, you're going to have a full 2.5 years to plot your next move. You will not be held accountable in a timely manner. So there is no deterrence. The next president, DeSantis, God help us, or somebody else, if they get into office, they can do it all over again because DOJ has put its stamp of approval on at least the 2 to 2.5 year waiting period before perhaps accountability is prodded into wakefulness. Again, I don't understand it. And the other thing, I posted something critical of DOJ this morning and everybody jumps on me. I'm either being criticized for not being hard enough on DOJ or being too hard on DOJ. But Dean, I will always call it the way I see it. DOJ was my professional home for nearly a quarter of a century. And I love many of my friends and former colleagues who are still there, but they have fallen down on the job. At least Merrick Garland has. Go back and look at the press release from Michael Cohen pleading guilty to being one half of the conspiracy. And everything is there in black and white in the press release and in the court paperwork pursuant to Michael Cohen's plea. Donald Trump is the other co-conspirator. And yet even 2.5 years after he left office, Merrick Garland's Department of Justice hasn't lifted a finger to charge Donald Trump for those easily provable crimes. That's an abdication of your law enforcement responsibility. That's different from Jack Smith and his team. They're going gangbusters, and I couldn't be more proud of the job they're doing. But you have to call out the bad, and you have to congratulate them for the good. And every agency has both good and bad in it. But I wish they would sort of step up and meet the challenge of the moment.
And last question, Glenn. The huge sign behind you that says the words "Justice Matters." What is justice involving Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, first let me brag, because I put 4 years of high school woodshop to good work, right? Yes, I make everything with my own hands.
Wow.
Including my videos, which that's why the production values are so poor. So what was the question? I just did my bit there, Dean.
Look, you're all about justice. You're Justice Matters guy. Yeah. What does justice look like in your view for Donald Trump?
It looks like him being charged, indicted for all the crimes he committed federally in Georgia, in New York, putting it into the hands of 12 representatives from the community in each of those jurisdictions and letting them decide. I've maintained for a long time the only thing standing between Donald Trump and a criminal conviction is an indictment. And the indictment, Dean, is the easy part. And why so few prosecutors have been unwilling to do that easy thing it's been disappointing. I'm glad Alvin Bragg has finally stepped up. It is a case that is not without some legal and factual challenges, but it was the right thing to bring the case. I told my prosecutors, I always had 30 federal homicide prosecutors that I supervised at any given time. We had lots of attrition and lots of movement through my homicide section. So I got to supervise lots of federal prosecutors, and I was supervised by lots of federal prosecutors. I always told them during the in-processing, it's more important to bring cases than it is to win cases. Because if you bring the righteous case, the case that is supported by the evidence but is not a sure thing, you're doing the right thing by the victim, by the community, by society, by the American people, because you're in the arena fighting the good fight. You put it in the hands of those 12 citizens in a jury box and you let them decide. There's no shame in losing, but there's nothing but shame in refusing to bring a case for fear of losing. And unfortunately, that is what often drives federal prosecutors. It's the fear of losing. And right now, they have to get over that.
I agree. DOJ's got to move. It's 2 years and 3 months. This is ridiculous. We're coming up to the 3-month anniversary of 2 years just this week. But Glenn, thank you so much for spending some time with us here at Salon Talks to chat about the indictment and going forward and what justice looks like to you. So I look forward to chatting with you in the future, my friend.
Thank you, Dean. My pleasure.